When my HOA drained the natural spring that had flowed on my property for generations, claiming flood risk, they had no idea they were unleashing nature's perfect revenge. As their manicured lawns turned to swamps and designer kitchens flooded with the very water they'd tried to control, I uncovered a web of corruption that went deeper than anyone imagined. "They can't take your water," my wife Sarah yelled as she slammed the official HOA notice on our kitchen table. I picked up the paper with shaking hands, reading the words that would turn our peaceful life upside down. The natural spring that had bubbled on my family's property for over 100 years was now labeled a flood hazard by the Cascade Heights HOA. Victoria Reed, our HOA president, had been eyeing my spring since she moved in 6 months ago. She called it an eyesore during her very first neighborhood walkthrough. "That muddy puddle brings down property values," she'd sneered, not bothering to learn that this puddle provided fresh water for local wildlife and kept our section of the neighborhood naturally cool during scorching summers. The notice gave me 30 days to eliminate the water source or face daily fines of $500. I felt sick to my stomach. This spring wasn't just water, it was my grandfather's legacy. He'd built stone pathways around it, planted willows that now stood 40 feet tall, and taught me to skip rocks across its surface when I was 5. 2 days later, I attended the emergency HOA meeting, armed with photos of the spring through different seasons and a petition signed by 12 neighbors who loved it. Victoria sat at the head table like a queen on her throne, flanked by her loyal board members. Martha, my next-door neighbor who'd always borrowed cups of sugar, now sat beside Victoria, avoiding my eyes. "The spring poses significant risk to our community's foundations," Victoria announced, holding up a thick report. "This geological survey confirms potential flooding could cause millions in damage." I stood up, my legs trembling but my voice steady. "That spring has existed since before these houses were built. There's never been a single flood incident." "Times change, water tables shift," Victoria countered smoothly. "We can't risk our children's safety for sentiment." "What children?" I asked. "The nearest house with kids is 3 blocks away." The room buzzed with whispers. Some neighbors nodded in agreement with me, but others looked worried, whispering about their mortgages and insurance rates. Martha suddenly spoke up. "I've noticed more mosquitoes lately. Standing water breeds disease." She still wouldn't meet my eyes. That's when I realized this wasn't about flooding at all. Victoria wanted my property value to drop so her developer friend could buy it cheap. I'd overheard her at the summer barbecue talking about maximizing land use potential in our area. "I demand to see this geological survey," I said. "Who conducted it? When did they visit my property?" Victoria's smile tightened. "The report is confidential to protect the surveyor from harassment." "That's not how property assessments work," called out Mr. Peterson, a retired lawyer from down the street. "The homeowner has a right to review any reports about their land." Victoria's face reddened. "We're not here to debate procedure. All in favor of the spring removal?" 7 hands shot up, all board members and their close friends. The motion passed. As people filed out, I caught Martha in the parking lot. "Why are you doing this? You used to bring your grandkids to feed the ducks at my spring." She glanced around nervously. Victoria promised to approve my home addition if I supported her. "I need that extra bedroom for when my daughter visits." My heart sank. Victoria was buying votes with favors. I drove home in a daze, wondering how to fight a system rigged against me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I heard vehicles outside. Peeking through my curtains, I saw 2 trucks parked near my property line. Dark figures moved in the moonlight, carrying equipment toward my spring. I grabbed my phone and flashlight, racing outside in my pajamas. "Hey, this is private property." The men froze. One stepped forward, Marcus, the HO maintenance manager. "Just doing some preliminary measurements, as authorized by the board." At 2 a.m., without notifying me, Victoria emerged from the shadows, clipboard in hand. "The HOA has 24-hour access rights for safety inspections. It's in your contract. This isn't an inspection. You're planning something." She smiled coldly. "We're being proactive about resident safety. Go back to bed." I stood my ground until they left, but I knew they'd return. The next morning, I called 3 lawyers. 2 declined after hearing HOA dispute, and the third wanted a $5,000 retainer just to review my case. Desperate, I visited the county records office. Hours of searching revealed something shocking. The geological surveyor Victoria hired was her brother-in-law, whose license had been suspended 2 years ago for falsifying reports. I also discovered that Cascade Heights was built on an ancient watershed system. My spring wasn't just decorative, It was a crucial pressure release for underground water flow. Blocking it could cause serious problems for the entire neighborhood. Armed with this information, I requested another HOA meeting. Victoria denied it, citing no new evidence. But I had one more card to play. I created a simple website with all my findings, including photos of the spring's 100-year history and the truth about the fake geological report. Then I shared it on our neighborhood Facebook group. Within hours, comments poured in. Some residents remembered the spring's history, others questioned the rushed decision. A few board members privately messaged me, admitting they felt pressured to vote yes. Victoria responded by sending cease and desist letters, claiming defamation. But truth isn't defamation, and I kept posting. Then came the turning point. Mrs. Henderson, who lived in Cascade Heights for 60 years, posted a comment that changed everything. That spring saved our neighborhood during the 1978 drought. When the city water failed, we all got our drinking water from that spring. It's not just pretty, it's essential. Suddenly, people were listening. They shared their own memories, their doubts about Victoria's motives. The tide was turning, but Victoria wasn't finished. That night, I received an anonymous call. Drop the website or you'll regret it. The voice was disguised, but I recognized the threat in its tone. The sound of heavy machinery jolted me awake at dawn. Industrial pumps lined my property border, their engines roaring as they sucked water from my spring. Victoria stood supervising, designer sunglasses hiding her eyes, while Marcus directed workers in orange vests. I ran outside, still in my pajamas. Stop. This is illegal. Victoria turned, unfazed. Article 7, Section 3 of the HOA bylaws. We have authority to address immediate safety hazards. She waved official-looking documents. Judge Keller signed this emergency order last night. My spring, which had flowed crystal clear for generations, was turning into a muddy pit before my eyes. 100-year-old lily pads shriveled as water levels dropped. A family of ducks waddled confusedly around their disappearing home. I called 911, but the operator said it was a civil matter. I called animal control about the displaced wildlife, but they needed 48 hours' notice. I felt helpless as my family's legacy drained away through industrial hoses. Sarah emerged with her phone, recording everything. "This is criminal," she said, her voice shaking with anger. Marcus stepped forward. "Ma'am, I need you to stop filming. This is private HOA business." "This is MY property," I countered. "And that's my spring you're destroying." By noon, the spring was gone. A crater of cracked mud remained where water once sparkled. The willow trees already showed signs of stress, their leaves curling. Martha appeared at her fence line that afternoon, planting new roses. "Sorry about your water feature," she said without looking up. "But property values should improve now." I stared at her in disbelief. "You do realize that spring fed the groundwater for this entire area?" She shrugged. "Victoria says the city water system is perfectly adequate." That evening, I met with Sam, a hydrologist friend from college. He studied my property maps and historical surveys, his face growing increasingly concerned. "This is bad," he muttered. "Really bad. Your spring wasn't just decorative. It was a pressure release valve for the entire aquifer system. What happens without it? The water has to go somewhere. It'll find the path of least resistance, probably through people's basements." I felt a glimmer of hope. If I could prove the spring's importance, maybe I could force them to restore it. We spent the next week gathering data. Sam installed monitoring equipment around the neighborhood, measuring soil moisture and groundwater levels. The readings were alarming. Pressure was building rapidly. I tried presenting this information at the next HOA meeting, but Victoria had changed the rules. "Only board members can add agenda items now," she announced smugly. Frustrated, I went public. Local news picked up the story: historic spring destroyed by HOA. Reporters interviewed Mrs. Henderson about the 1978 drought. Environmental groups expressed outrage. Victoria fought back with her own media campaign. She hired a PR firm to paint me as a disgruntled homeowner spreading misinformation. They released statements about modernizing infrastructure and protecting families. The battle escalated. Victoria filed a lawsuit for defamation. I countersued for property damage. Legal bills mounted on both sides. Then the first basement flooded. The Johnsons, who lived 6 houses down, woke up to 3 inches of water in their finished basement. Their insurance called it groundwater intrusion, not covered. 2 days later, the Garcias reported water seeping through their foundation. Then the Parkinsons. Then Martha. I watched from my window as Martha frantically bailed water from her basement, her prized roses drowning in the oversaturated soil. Part of me felt vindicated, but mostly I felt sad. This was all so preventable. Emergency HOA meetings became weekly events. Residents demanded answers. Victoria kept deflecting. These are isolated incidents, she insisted. Old pipes, poor drainage, nothing to do with the spring. But Sam's data told a different story. The aquifer, without its natural release valve, was forcing water up through any available crack. The entire water table was destabilizing. I shared Sam's findings on the neighborhood Facebook group. Comments exploded. My sump pump hasn't stopped running in days. There's a spring bubbling up in my backyard now. My foundation guy says this could cost $50,000 to fix. Property values plummeted. 3 houses went up for sale. The local news returned, this time with headlines like HOA's decision creates neighborhood nightmare. Victoria grew desperate. She tried to blame the city, the weather, global warming, anything but her own decision. She even suggested I had sabotaged the neighborhood somehow. But the real bombshell came when Mr. Peterson, the retired lawyer, did some digging of his own. Follow the money, he told me over coffee. Victoria's brother-in-law doesn't just do fake surveys. He owns a drainage company. We discovered that Victoria had awarded a $2 million contract to her brother-in-law's company to manage water issues in Cascade Heights. The same company that drained my spring was now being paid to fix the problems that drainage caused. I filed a complaint with the state attorney general. Investigators arrived within days. They subpoenaed HOA financial records, interviewed board members, and documented the growing water damage throughout the neighborhood. Victoria tried to resign quietly, but residents demanded a public meeting. The school auditorium was packed. Angry homeowners waived repair bills and insurance denials. When Victoria took the microphone, boos erupted. She tried to speak about unforeseen circumstances and acting in good faith, but nobody was buying it. Then I played my trump card. Sarah had continued recording that morning when they drained my spring. In the background of one video, barely audible, Victoria could be heard telling Marcus, once property values drop, my developer friends will buy up the whole block. We'll all make millions. The auditorium exploded. People shouted for Victoria's arrest. Board members resigned on the spot. Martha publicly apologized, admitting Victoria had promised her special favors. State investigators took Victoria into custody that night. She faced charges of fraud, conspiracy, and misuse of HOA funds. Her brother-in-law's company went bankrupt. The developer scheme collapsed. But our problems were just beginning. The neighborhood was still flooding. Insurance companies had declared it a man-made disaster. Homeowners faced financial ruin. In the end, it took a federal disaster declaration to get help. Engineers worked for months to restore the natural water flow. My spring was rebuilt, but it would take years to fully recover. The cost? Over $10 million. Most came from Victoria's seized assets and the HOA's insurance. She got 15 years in prison. Martha now leads a reformed HOA focused on environmental preservation. She tends a memorial garden where my spring flows again, teaching children about the importance of working with nature, not against it. As for me, I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't elaborate schemes, it's simply letting nature take its course. Water always finds its way, and so does justice. The knock at my door startled me awake. I blinked at my phone, 3:27 a.m. Who visits at this hour? Through the peephole, I saw my neighbor Bill, drenched and frantic. The water's everywhere, he panted as I opened the door. My basement flooded completely, 3 inches deep. I grabbed my jacket. Something wasn't right. Bill's house sat uphill from mine. Water shouldn't flow that direction unless. The next morning, I spent hours at the county records office, my fingers blackened from dusty file folders. The clerk raised an eyebrow as I requested more maps, but I needed answers. That's when I found it. A 1952 geological survey showing Cascade Heights sat on top of natural underground water channels. My spring wasn't just decoration. It was part of a complex system that kept water pressure stable for the entire neighborhood. By capping it, Victoria had turned our community into a pressure cooker ready to burst. At home, I called Sam, my hydrologist friend from college. You're sitting on a water bomb, he confirmed after reviewing my findings. That spring acted like a safety valve. Block it, and the water finds other ways out, usually through foundations. I needed more proof. Using a borrowed ground-penetrating radar, I mapped water movement under our streets. The readings were terrifying. Water pressure had doubled in just 2 weeks. At this rate, half the neighborhood would be underwater by spring. The next HOA meeting was packed. Residents complained about damp basements and cracking foundations. Victoria sat at the head table, perfectly composed in her designer's suit. "These are isolated incidents," she insisted, shuffling papers. "Our drainage expert assured us." "Your expert never even visited the site." I stood up, holding the geological survey. "This proves our spring was essential for water management." Martha jumped to her feet. "Victoria has increased our property values by 20%. Why should we trust you over our successful board president?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. I realized Victoria had bought their loyalty with false promises. "Ask yourself why she rushed this project," I pressed on. "Why hire consultants who never inspect the property? Why ignore decades of natural balance?" Victoria's smile tightened. "Motion to adjourn this." "Wait," Bill interrupted. "My insurance adjuster says the flooding is from disrupted groundwater. They won't cover the damage." The room erupted in worried chatter. Victoria banged her gavel repeatedly, but order wouldn't return. I met Sam outside afterward. "There's something else," he whispered, glancing around nervously. I traced the drainage contractor. "It's owned by Victoria's brother-in-law. She's getting kickbacks." "Can you prove it?" "Working on it. But be careful, she's got powerful friends." That evening, I installed security cameras around my property. If Victoria was corrupt, she might try anything to silence me. Sure enough, at midnight, I caught footage of someone tampering with my water meter. The figure wore a hood, but I recognized Marcus, the HO maintenance manager. He was trying to frame me for the flooding. I backed up the video to 3 separate drives. This was bigger than I'd imagined. The following week, more basements flooded. The community pool cracked from underground pressure. Even Victoria's allies began questioning her decisions. I spent nights researching water rights law, discovering the HO had violated multiple state regulations. They'd needed permits for major drainage changes, permits they never obtained. At the library, I found newspaper articles about Victoria's previous HOA. She'd resigned suddenly after financial irregularities. The pattern was clear, but I needed solid evidence. Then Martha appeared at my door, mascara running down her cheeks. "My roses are dying," she sobbed. "The yard's completely waterlogged. Victoria promised this would never happen." "Did she promise you anything else?" I asked gently. Martha hesitated, then nodded. "A board position. Extra votes on landscaping committees. But now..." She gestured helplessly at her ruined garden. I showed her my research. Her eyes widened with each document. "She's been playing us all," Martha whispered. "Will you help me expose this?" She straightened her shoulders. "Yes. I have emails." She offered several residents special treatment for support. Together, we built our case. More neighbors came forward with stories of bribes and threats. Victoria had created a network of corruption, all to line her pockets. The state finally took notice when I filed a formal complaint with the Department of Environmental Protection. Investigators arrived, taking water samples and interviewing residents. Victoria tried damage control, hosting wine and cheese gatherings where she spun tales of necessary improvements. But fewer people attended each time. Late one night, reviewing financial records Martha had smuggled from board meetings, I found the smoking gun. Payments to the drainage company matched exactly with unexplained deposits in Victoria's personal account. I had her cornered, but Victoria wasn't finished. The next morning, I found a cease and desist letter in my mailbox, threatening legal action for defamation. She declared war. I was ready. Water exploded through Victoria's kitchen floor during the emergency board meeting. The irony was perfect. She'd been mid-sentence denying any connection between the spring drainage and neighborhood flooding when her designer tiles buckled upward. "Everyone out!" I shouted as water sprayed toward the ceiling. Board members scrambled for the exits, expensive shoes ruined in the sudden indoor lake. Victoria stood frozen, watching her granite countertops crack from the pressure. "This is impossible," she kept repeating. But I knew better. The underground aquifer had finally found its breaking point, right beneath the person responsible for disturbing it. Outside, residents gathered in shocked clusters. Martha clutched her rescued meeting notes, now water-stained evidence. News vans arrived within minutes. Someone had tipped off Channel 7. "Is it true the HOA president's house just flooded?" A reporter thrust a microphone toward me. Before I could answer, Victoria burst out, hair disheveled, pointing accusingly. "This is sabotage. He did this." The camera swung between us. I remained calm. "I've been warning about this for weeks. Nature doesn't follow HOA rules." That's when Harold, our treasurer, stepped forward. He'd been quiet throughout the controversy, but now his hands shook as he produced a folder. "I can't stay silent anymore," he announced. "These are the real financial records. Victoria's been skimming HOA funds." The crowd gasped. Victoria lunged for the documents, but Harold held firm. Camera flashes lit up the scene like lightning. "Show us page 7, I urged, remembering the suspicious payments I'd discovered. Harold flipped to the page, revealing transfers to VR Consulting, Victoria's shell company. The drainage contractor payments matched perfectly. "This is a setup," Victoria shrieked. But water continued gushing from her house, a natural metaphor for her crumbling empire. State investigators arrived by afternoon. They'd received my complaint but hadn't acted until the public flooding incident. Now they swarmed the neighborhood, collecting evidence. I guided them to key locations, showing how the drainage system violated environmental codes. They took soil samples, measured water tables, and interviewed residents. Martha became our star witness. She promised me preferential treatment, she told investigators. Said my property value would double if I supported the spring removal. More neighbors came forward. Victoria had offered everyone something: reduced fees, committee positions, expedited approvals. Her corruption ran deep. The insurance companies sent their own investigators. With documented HOA negligence, they denied all flooding claims. Residents faced financial ruin. "We trusted her," Bill said, surveying his destroyed basement. "Now we're losing everything." I organized a community meeting at the local school gym, neutral territory. Residents needed answers and solutions. "We can fix this," I explained, presenting restoration plans. "But first, we need to remove corrupt leadership and recover stolen funds." That night, security cameras caught Victoria loading boxes into her car. I called the sheriff immediately. They intercepted her at the county line with HOA laptops and shredded documents. Her arrest made headlines. HOA president caught fleeing after flood scandal. The mugshot showed her designer outfit mud-splattered, hair wild, a far cry from her polished image. During interrogation, she cracked. The full scope emerged: years of embezzlement across multiple HOAs. She targeted communities with valuable natural features, destroying them for profit. The trial moved quickly. I testified about discovering the geological surveys, the illegal drainage, the tampered water meter. Martha described the bribery attempts. Harold explained the financial fraud. Victoria's defense claimed she'd acted for community benefit, but prosecutor Sarah Chin systematically destroyed each argument. The security footage of her counting cash with contractors sealed her fate. Guilty on all counts, the judge declared. Victoria received 15 years for fraud, environmental violations, and conspiracy. Her assets were seized to fund neighborhood restoration. But legal victory couldn't immediately fix flooded homes. Engineers worked overtime, designing systems to restore natural water flow. The spring needed careful reopening to prevent further damage. Insurance battles continued. Some residents sold their ruined properties at huge losses. Others formed a class action lawsuit against Victoria and her associates. Throughout it all, I documented everything. Local universities requested my research for case studies on environmental justice. The story went viral: David versus HOA Goliath. Martha surprised everyone by volunteering to lead the interim HOA board. "I helped create this mess," she admitted. "I want to help fix it." Together, we established new bylaws requiring environmental impact studies and transparent finances. No more backroom deals or rushed projects. Contractors worked through winter, installing proper drainage while preparing to restore the spring. The aquifer needed time to rebalance after months of disruption. By spring, cautious optimism spread through Cascade Heights. Properties dried out, foundations were repaired, and the community learned valuable lessons about blind trust. As water began flowing again from my restored spring, children gathered to watch. Their wonder reminded me why this fight mattered: preserving natural beauty for future generations. Victoria's empire had crumbled like her waterlogged mansion. But from that destruction, our community emerged stronger, wiser, and more united than ever. Water dripped from the courtroom ceiling as I took my seat. Even the courthouse wasn't safe from what we'd unleashed. Victoria sat at the defendant's table, her designer's suit wrinkled and hair disheveled, a far cry from the polished HOA president who'd ruled Cascade Heights with an iron fist. "The state calls its next witness," announced the prosecutor. My neighbor Martha shuffled forward, clutching soggy documents. "Mrs. Henderson, please tell the court what happened to your home after the spring was drained," the prosecutor began. Martha's voice trembled. 3 feet of water in my basement. My wedding photos, my children's baby albums, all destroyed. The mold grew so fast. She choked back tears. Victoria's lawyer jumped up. Objection. This is emotional manipulation. Your client manipulated an entire neighborhood, the judge replied coldly. Continue, Mrs. Henderson. I watched as Martha revealed how Victoria had promised her a board position in exchange for support. She said property values would skyrocket if we got rid of that eyesore spring. I trusted her. The prosecutor displayed bank records on a screen. These show monthly payments from Cascade Drainage Solutions to an offshore account belonging to Ms. Reed. Can you explain this, Ms. Reed? Victoria remained silent, but her face had gone pale. During the break, I overheard two jurors whispering. Can you believe she thought she'd get away with this? One muttered. The afternoon session brought more bombshells. The state's geological expert testified that Victoria had ignored 3 separate warnings about aquifer pressure. She was informed that removing the spring could destabilize the entire water table, he stated. Her response was, and I quote, "I don't pay you for opinions." Victoria's brother-in-law, owner of Cascade Drainage Solutions, took a plea deal and testified against her. She approached me with the scheme, he admitted. Said we'd split the profits 60-40. The HOA would pay inflated prices, and I'd kick back the difference. The courtroom gasped when surveillance footage showed Victoria accepting a briefcase full of cash in a parking garage. As evidence mounted, Victoria's composure cracked. During cross-examination, she exploded. You're all jealous, she screamed. I made Cascade Heights prestigious. That spring was bringing down property values. I did what needed to be done. By destroying people's homes? I couldn't help calling out. The judge banged his gavel. Order. Victoria pointed at me. This is all your fault. If you just complied with HOA rules. Rules you created to line your pockets, the prosecutor interrupted smoothly. The forensic accountant testified next, revealing Victoria had embezzled over $800,000 in HOA funds. She disguised the payments as emergency maintenance and flood prevention measures, he explained, showing charts that made the jury gasp. When court adjourned, reporters swarmed outside. How does it feel to see justice served? One asked me. This isn't about revenge, I replied carefully. It's about accountability. Our community trusted her, and she betrayed that trust. That evening, emergency crews worked overtime as another basement flooded. The local news ran our story alongside footage of waterlogged homes. HOA president's greed creates environmental disaster, the headline read. My phone buzzed with messages from residents. Some thanked me for exposing the truth. Others blamed me for their ruined homes. The community was divided, but at least now they knew the truth. Victoria's defense crumbled the next day when emails surfaced showing she'd planned the scheme months before anyone complained about my spring. Target the water feature first, she'd written to her brother-in-law. Create a problem, then offer our solution. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours. Guilty on all counts, the foreman announced. Victoria slumped in her chair as the judge detailed her crimes. Fraud, embezzlement, environmental destruction, and racketeering. Ms. Reed, you abused your position of trust for personal gain, causing immeasurable damage to your community, the judge declared. I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison and order full restitution to the victims. As bailiffs led Victoria away, she turned to me one last time. I hope you're happy, she spat. I'm not happy, I replied honestly. But I am relieved that the truth came out. Outside, news vans lined the street. Cascade Heights faced a long recovery. Insurance companies had denied most claims, citing the man-made nature of the disaster. Many families faced financial ruin. Marcus, the former maintenance manager who'd helped drain my spring, approached me nervously. I'm sorry, he said. Victoria threatened to fire me if I didn't help. My kid needs medical care, and I couldn't lose my insurance. I understood his position, even if I couldn't fully forgive his actions. What matters now is helping our community heal, I told him. That night, I stood at my kitchen window, watching emergency pumps work overtime in my neighbors' yards. The spring's absence had created a chain reaction none of us could have predicted. Property values had plummeted 40% overnight. Several families had already moved out, unable to afford repairs. My phone rang. It was Sam, my hydrologist friend. I've been analyzing the water table data, he said urgently. We need to restore that spring soon, or the damage will become permanent. How soon? I asked. Within 6 months, or the aquifer could collapse entirely. That would affect not just Cascade Heights, but 3 surrounding neighborhoods. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders. Victoria's greed had created this mess, but now it fell to us to fix it. As rain began to fall, I watched water pool in yards that had once been perfectly manicured. Nature was reclaiming what we'd tried to control, and the price was higher than anyone had imagined. 6 months later, I stood knee-deep in mud, directing the restoration crew. Careful with that pipe. I called out as workers maneuvered equipment around the spring site. The morning air buzzed with activity, excavators, engineers, and volunteers all working together to undo Victoria's damage. Martha approached, wearing rubber boots and carrying coffee. "I never thought I'd say this, but I miss your spring," she admitted, handing me a cup. Her transformation from Victoria's supporter to environmental advocate had surprised everyone, including herself. "The aquifer readings are looking better," Sam announced, checking his tablet. "Pressure's stabilizing, but we're not out of danger yet." The restoration wasn't just about bringing back my spring. It was about saving our entire community. Federal disaster funds, combined with Victoria's seized assets, barely covered the costs. Every resident had pitched in, from the elderly couple who made sandwiches for workers to teenagers who helped clear debris. 3 weeks into restoration, we had our first major setback. A utility line Victoria had illegally installed without permits ruptured, flooding the work site. Progress halted as we dealt with contaminated soil and damaged equipment. "This is exactly what Victoria wanted," one frustrated neighbor complained at an emergency meeting. "Even from prison, she's still causing problems." "No," I corrected firmly. "This is what happens when someone cuts corners. We're doing this right, even if it takes longer." The breakthrough came unexpectedly. While excavating, we discovered an old Native American water management system, stone channels that had naturally regulated the spring for centuries before modern development. Our indigenous consultant, Dr. Sarah Clearwater, was amazed. "Your spring wasn't just decorative," she explained to the gathered crowd. "It was part of a sophisticated network that kept this entire area in balance." This discovery changed everything. Instead of simply restoring the spring, we incorporated traditional wisdom with modern engineering. The project became a model for sustainable development, attracting attention from environmental groups nationwide. Local schools brought students to learn about water ecology. Martha started a community garden using responsible irrigation methods. Even former skeptics began to understand the connection between nature and neighborhood health. The day we finally reopened the spring, hundreds gathered to watch. As the first clear water bubbled up, children cheered and adults wiped away tears. The sound of flowing water, absent for so long, felt like music. "I want to thank everyone who believed in this project," I said to the crowd, "especially those who initially opposed it but were willing to learn and change." Martha stepped forward. "As the new HOA president, I'm proud to announce our revised bylaws. From now on, all environmental decisions require community input and expert consultation." The transformation extended beyond water management. Property values began recovering as our story attracted environmentally conscious buyers. Cascade Heights became known not for its HOA drama, but for its innovative approach to suburban ecology. 6 months after restoration, our neighborhood hosted its first spring festival. Artists painted murals depicting the aquifer system. Local restaurants served dishes using herbs from Martha's community garden. Children splashed in designated areas of the spring, their laughter echoing through the neighborhood. Victoria's former mansion, seized by authorities, became the Cascade Heights Environmental Education Center. Inside, displays explained the disaster and its lessons. A prominent exhibit featured the corrupt emails and fake geological reports, serving as a warning about unchecked power. I often gave tours, sharing our story with visitors. "The spring taught us that everything's connected," I'd explain. "When we try to control nature without understanding it, we create problems we can't foresee." Not everything was perfect. Some families never returned, their trust in the community broken. Others still struggled with repair costs. But we learned to work together, to question authority when necessary, and to respect the natural systems that sustained us. 1 year after restoration, the spring received official protection status. No future HOA could drain it without extensive environmental review. We created legal safeguards to prevent another Victoria. The most satisfying moment came during a surprise inspection. State officials confirmed our aquifer had fully stabilized. "Your community's response to this crisis is remarkable," the lead inspector said. "You've turned a disaster into a blueprint for environmental stewardship." Martha and I often sat by the spring in the evenings, watching fireflies dance over the water. "Remember when I complained about your gaudy water feature?" She'd laugh. "I was such a fool." We all were, I'd reply. We let someone convince us that nature was the enemy. The spring had become more than water. It was a symbol of resilience and redemption. Families picnicked on its banks. Wedding photographers used it as a backdrop. New residents learned its story and pledged to protect it. As I write this, children are learning to identify native plants in our educational garden. Solar panels power the community center. Rain barrels collect water for irrigation. We've become the change we needed. Victoria served her time and disappeared from public view. Last I heard, she was living quietly in another state. Sometimes I wonder if she ever understood the magnitude of what she'd done, not just the environmental damage, but the breach of trust. The spring flows clear and strong now, its gentle sound a constant reminder of nature's persistence and power. What began as one person's greed became a community's awakening. We learned that sometimes the greatest disasters lead to the most meaningful transformations. As I watch new families move in, drawn by our story of environmental recovery, I realize Victoria inadvertently gave us a gift. She showed us what happens when power goes unchecked, when profit trumps responsibility, when we ignore nature's warnings. Now, every bubbling surge of spring water whispers the same message: respect, balance, and vigilance. The spring that Victoria tried to destroy became the heart of our reborn community, a testament to what happens when people choose cooperation over control, understanding over dominance, and harmony over profit.